Thank you, folks. Folks, I'm especially excited to have this conversation now. I think this is a profound film that almost requires a conversation. You're going to do conversations after every screening when it's released? I think that should be done. Please welcome back the director, Shawn Snyder, please.
Thank you very much.
Wherever you'd like, I'd love to introduce first of all, the producers of the film. Are they in here? They made it in? Yes. Emily Mortimer and Alessandro Nivola. And two more people who you've just had a very intimate experience with. Please help us welcome Géza Röhrig and Matthew Broderick. That's one more chair. And I know there's some other folks from the film here. I don't know, Shawn, if you wanted to acknowledge any others and let them all get applause. But
yeah, Jason Bagay, my co-writer, is here as well. Michelle Paolella, my co-writer and partner in life and love and parenthood, is here as well. And Joseph Siprit, investor and undertaker. And Scott Donnelly and Suzanne Jacobson from Good Deed Entertainment, who are lovingly distributing our film. Oh, right. I see. Oh, here, you guys are hiding from vision. Sammy and Leo, Noam and Naftali are here. As well as their parents, who, when you're working with lovely kid actors, are as much a part of the process. So.
And I'll mention February 8th again, just so everybody knows when it's opening. I'm going to start this. Emily, I'm actually starting with you, because in some ways this whole project started with you, and Shawn will get into the origins of all of this, but you read the script, and what was it that made you say, hey, this is a project that I want to get involved with?
Well, first of all, I didn't know we were going to be doing this Q&A, and so I had far too much tequila at dinner, and I don't know what I'm saying, but
that's the only way we do it.
Very task.
Anyway, I know I do. I'm not too drunk that I don't remember first reading the script. I was asked to be a juror on the Tribeca Film Institute award for screenplays that they did in conjunction with the Sloan Foundation, and as I do with most things in life, I left it to the very last minute, the last night, to read 8 scripts and have to go into this deliberation the next morning. And Sandro describes the moment that I was lying in bed literally the night before I had to go and talk about all these screenplays and in a total panic, and one by one there'd be a thud as I was a sort of disgusted thud as I threw one screenplay after the next down on the floor, and then finally the last one I got to was to Dust, and he waited for the thud, and it never came. And I couldn't put it down, and it just felt, I was immediately just struck by it and how unlike anything else I'd ever read it was. And I've read a lot of scripts, as we all have as actors, you know, and mostly they're really bad. And sometimes they're not, and it's sort of, you don't really know what it is that makes them not. But it was definitely unlike anything else. It was a completely original take on life. It was a sort of key into a world that you hadn't seen before, and it was very specific and very funny and very sad. It made me laugh and cry, and it was about the sort of the big questions of life, and I wanted to meet the guy that wrote it. I just immediately felt like I want to know who this person is, or these people are. It's amazing, this brain that's come up with this thing. And anyway, and so then I I battled for it to win the prize, which it did. It wasn't much of a battle, and I gave it. Am I talking too much? Yes, I've got to stop now. No.
Doing good.
Anyway, I gave it to Sandro to read, and immediately and said, "We've got to produce this somehow and get it made," and he agreed, and that was the beginning.
Now you know who to blame. Shawn, let's go back to the beginning now. Let's take it back a step. We'll let Emily, sober up a little bit, and tell us what inspired this. I know that beyond the film background, you also have a religion background. You studied religion, and that's definitely both elements are there in this film. But where did this start for you? Where did the idea come from, and what made you want to tell this story?
The earliest seeds of the film were planted when I lost my mom 10 years ago to cancer. It was 10 years in September. And I come from a Reform Jewish background, which is certainly not a Hasidic background by any stretch. And yet the Jewish guidelines and practices and timelines and goalposts through grief are still very much a thing. And I've always found the Jewish process of mourning, at least intellectually, never having experienced the depths of my own grief, to be amazingly profound, amazingly wise, ancient, incredibly intuitive about our modern understanding of the psychology of grief, and also to be amazingly life-affirming in the face of tragedy, and to understand that there's a period where one should excessively grieve before sort of being heralded and shepherded back to the world. But when I lost my mom, and I believe that grief is as specific as the relationship between the person who is lost and the person who's left behind, and needs to honor the person who's lost in an idiosyncratic way, and needs to get the person who's been left behind through, this life in absence of the person who's missing. And whatever works, as long as it doesn't hurt anybody else, or any pigs, maybe, I don't know. And so there's this sense that even though it was very meaningful to be honoring my mom and mourning alongside my family, and for my own spiritual connections that have waxed and waned through the years to my own Judaism, to be mourning my mom in the Jewish way, that it wasn't entirely sufficient, that my grief was spilling outside the boundaries of those confines, and especially that timeline. And so much so that it's 10 years on and I still grieve. But grief isn't something that I want to purge. It's something that I've taken inside me and that I want to live with and that I appreciate. And I'm grateful for the ways in which it evolves, both in the way that it keeps my mom present and still a part of my life, and the way that it keeps my existential compass pointed to true north. So those were the roots, just this sense that atop or aside or instead of our cultures of origin and the rituals we're given, that we have the right to find meaning and make our own rituals.
There's a lot there. I hope we have time to dig into that a little deeper. But Matthew, I wanted to ask you, what attracted you to this film? And I mean, it's fabulous roles, and both of you do a fantastic job. What attracted you to this film?
Oh, thank you. Well, I read it, and I thought it was a very interesting script and kind of unusual. And I was interested, like Emily, in who wrote it, and I thought it was a good story that I hadn't seen. And then I also I knew that Géza was doing it and wanted to work with him. And not you. I didn't care that you were involved in it. That's not true. These two I know also, and they were very persistent, so I sort of had to do it. But I met Shawn and really liked him, and I thought it was good. I until you really start to do something, I don't have that much. It just felt like something that was worth doing.
Yeah, I think it's rare to see a film that deals with death in this kind of way, and not just with the comedic elements of it, but just talks about death in a serious way and our existence here on the planet. And I'm assuming anyone who reads this script is not going to make a decision lightly whether they're taking a part in it or not. So that was a brave decision.
Oh, good. Thank you.
And you got to wear a pink bathrobe.
I did, a pink bathrobe. That was nice. Yeah.
That's memorable. Géza, I wanted to ask you specifically, one of the great things about this film is we're entering a world here that requires a lot of authenticity, a lot of reality that most people, I don't know how many people involved in the film were actually a part of. I know you grew your own beard for this film. How were you able to portray this world, this character, in such an authentic world? What part of you was there in such an authentic way? Excuse me.
Thank you. Generally, I have a beard, but not as long as, and certainly my hair is generally a bit longer than in the movie. I can just say, basically repeat what the others did. Even on the level of script, this was a very convincing material, and I had the privilege to join this project really early on, like a good year before the shooting started. And I developed a really good, deep friendship with Shawn, and we had countless coffees and conversations about the movie. And I felt like I didn't have to step out of my skin. I did learn in a yeshiva. It was a Hasidic yeshiva. This is part of my life. And on the other hand, this is art. You know, there was lots of discussions about the house and even every word and dialogue. But there was no question in my mind that this movie brings together worlds like religion and science and death and humor. That in itself was so refreshing. Because just like Emily mentioned, I do read scripts too, and generally on page 10 you know where it is heading to, and it's so predictable. And here, me and my wife putting the kids into bed, we were like on page 40, and we had no idea what's the next twist it's going to be.
Tell them about, are you allowed to tell them about the place opposite that you work in, that gives you, that you have worked in?
You mean the
Day job.
Your day
well, it's
job.
not really a day job anymore. But yeah, I'm a member of a Chevra Kadisha, which is, this is a Jewish audience, so you know very well what that is, the Holy Brotherhood, which, so I am blessed to be part of this team that, you know, washes a male deceased, and I always found that experience doing it transformational, uplifting, yeah.
That's intense and definitely brings a lot of authenticity to this film. Alessandro, I think you also were the expert on the Hasidic world. Alessandro was last here with Disobedience. Yeah,
2017
You're
was
really
my year as an Orthodox Jew.
You're branding yourself here as only Orthodox. They're making a remake of Yentl. I think you'll audition. What was your connection to this?
Well, I mean, my connection was that we decided we wanted to make the movie, and you know, what ensued was a kind of really old-fashioned indie filmmaking process of cobbling together money for months and months and months, and then sort of housing our DP in my mom's apartment in Brooklyn, and driving our crew across the Verrazano Bridge to Staten Island, where we were filming in strange places where park rangers were accosting us and nearly killed Matthew one night. We got a call from Matthew late at night after we'd left a location in a park in Staten Island, and he had locked himself in his little dressing
area. It wasn't from
area.
Matthew, I think it was from the second AD.
Oh yeah,
Matthew couldn't get to himself.
He couldn't leave this room because he'd locked himself in because this park ranger had gone loco and
was throwing chairs.
You used her in the film then to play the woman who stops them? No.
Anyway, M came in and talked this guy down. No, but it was a kind of great, totally coincidental that I was playing an Orthodox rabbi in another movie at the time that we were making this. And in fact, we'd been developing this for almost 2 years before I was offered that job, and that just came along completely by coincidence. But I think he's here, Zalman Raxin. Are you here? Where are you? Here, over here. So Zalman, I met in Crown Heights near where I live, and when I was preparing for Disobedience, and he had taught me initially kind of the Hebrew that I had the blessings that I had to say in that movie, and a lot of other kind of behavioral things, and we'd made friends, and he'd invited me into the bosom of his family, and so when this movie came around, we needed a Hasidic advisor, somebody who could make sure that we were preserving the authenticity of everything in that world. And so he then came on to this film in that capacity. And then he became an actor in the film, and he's in the movie. And then his son was in the movie. And it just went on and on and on. Yeah, I mean, there was a kind of fortunate timing with those two movies.
Well, the world that we enter seems very real, deep, and researched. There's another interesting element about this film that, Shawn, I don't know if this was your intention, and I'd love to hear your commentary on it. But ultimately, this is about a man who's coming from a spiritual world that does not know anything about science, and has to seek out. I mean, that's really the impetus for all of this. He has to seek out somebody from the modern world, I'm going to call it, from the secular world, to learn about science. And this is something that actually is going on in the ultra-Orthodox community, that there's a lack of secular education. There are lawsuits in New York State right now going on about this topic, where people are lacking kind of a broader education, and the education system is really focusing only on Jewish topics. Was that something that you wanted to bring to light?
Absolutely. There were articles that I had read. One was a former Hasid who had left the community, and he went on to study science. He said that he had never heard the word molecule until he was in a college course. And this, it's been interesting because, among the varied responses to the film, one of them has been a question as to whether or not Shmuel seems particularly naive. He seems too naive. It seems maybe like you're playing up his naivete for comic purposes, or he seems so simple. And without disrespecting the Hasidic community, I would say that I've seen these articles. I read a whole statement by the Satmar Rebbe that passionately says anybody who's fighting for enforcement of secular education rules in our school systems is should be expelled from the religion. It's complete apostasy. And there's the sense of this huge question, and it's very gray. Does exposure to the secular world, does breaking down these borders, does asking these questions lead to apostasy, or is there a conversation that can be had that is made richer by both communities and both worlds sort of entering in a conversation with each other? And I don't know what the answer is to that. And it was always important, I think Shmuel is very smart. He proves to be Albert's best student ever, and he's very perceptive, but I think it is very honest that he is seeking out a subject that he knows nothing about, and it doesn't say anything about his level of intelligence. In fact, the fact that he can integrate it so quickly, I think, makes him very, very wise and brilliant. But it's an interesting conversation. I think maybe I'm outed in the film to some extent a little bit about where I stand about that belief, but I also think that ambiguity is sort of a necessary and beautiful part of art, and there are questions about how the Hasidic community is going to respond to this film. And while the film blasphemes and the character blasphemes, it is never intended to disrespect. It's supposed to honor the faith. In fact, it's not the story of a man who wants to leave. It's about a man who wants to return, and a man who wants to reconcile these divergent thoughts and inclinations with a community that he loves. And it's interesting, but I feel proud of the way that we're handling it. I feel that there is an ambiguity in the film too, that perhaps a Hasidic viewer might watch it and say, I told you so, this is a cautionary tale. He looked at science, and the next thing we knew, he was Breaking Bad. He was, as a Hasid, look what that led to.
Next thing you know, you're burying pigs, right?
Murdering pigs.
And that ambiguity, is purposeful and sort of, is this a man going insane, or is this a man doing something noble and essential for himself and for his deceased wife?
Just may I say something? Just really interject for 1 second. I without doubting, of course, these symptoms that in some of these insular communities, the kids are, undereducated. But all in all, essentially and traditionally, let's just point out, for the sake of fairness, that the rabbis and Judaism actually has nothing to afraid of science. We are not the religion that banned during the Inquisition any sort of discoveries. And to the contrary, actually, we refuse this whole idea, this general notion that is out there in modernity, which imagines this issue as some sort of a seesaw. The more you believe, the less you know, and the less you know, the more you believe. Actually, if you're a religious person, the more you know, the more wonder you have about the complexity and the beauty of the universe. So religion and science are not competing territories, and Judaism is actually, to my knowledge, is the religion which is very open and has nothing to worry about science.
And indeed, Maimonides, one of the greatest sages of Judaism, was a doctor too, and wrote a lot about religion, and these things can come together. And that's actually, this will be my last question. Then we'll open it to questions from the audience. This actually goes to Géza and Matthew, as far as the relationship of your characters in this film is actually the beauty of this bridge that is being built between these two communities. Do you think that did you find that your characters can maintain friendship, that can live on, that this is not just a relationship of the needs of that specific moment?
I don't know. We've talked about that a little bit. The film sort of ends, and the feeling is they probably might not see each other. We always wondered, would they see each other again? Are they friends by the end of the film? I'm not really sure, actually. But it's an interesting question. I think the distance they travel, I mean, at the beginning, they're so foreign to each other. And later in the film, when they're spending time in the car, you do feel that they've started to actually be able to communicate, even though they speak totally differently and they have different values, all these things, but they become a pair of humans,
Classic road trip arc, I think.
Yeah, I think it's true. Yeah,
I firmly believe that they will meet in the future, sort of like war veterans who might be very different. Veterans. That's
I think that's what you mean.
That's what I meant. Yeah.
I don't know what it means. I don't always understand.
Forgive my accent.
I tried.
Okay. Live in Hungary for 36 years.
I know. I've never been to Hungary.
No, I couldn't. So in any case,
they'll be playing the JCC for one night only next.
So just like war veterans, right? I think they, just because they went through something really charging and hard and difficult, and I think they get together at least once a year, and maybe they don't talk too much over a coffee, but they do want to see each other, just because that experience brought them together in a very important point of their lives.
They will be a part of each other's lives for sure in some way, just because they've changed each other. I'd love to take a few questions from the audience. I'll also mention, this is my point where I mentioned that those who stay through the end, there's a reception upstairs, so you'll be rewarded. We're going to pass the microphone around. Morgan, you have a mic. I see there's a woman with her hand up right in the middle.
Thank you all for sharing. But my question is to Shawn. What a beautiful film, but I'm so curious of your creative process of, you had said you grew up Reformed, of how you decided or figured out to show somebody so religious and use science. And I also love how you captured the Yiddish quotes. You did it so well.
Those Yiddish quotes, I mean, I certainly researched some more, but the flavor of them, comes straight from my grandfather. They're priceless, and in their bawdiness and vulgarity and their wisdom. There's some Yiddish strewn throughout the film that we choose not to translate, and then the one that we do just seemed to, like it was too much of a cop-out to not translate. Albert specifically says, I have no idea what you're talking about, but it's if... don't piss on my back and tell me it's raining. There's another one. I don't know the Yiddish. It's if my grandmother had balls, she would be my grandfather. This wit, I mean, this idea of the humor in the film, too, just comes from Judaism so innately. So all these threads were kind of laid throughout my life, and these seeds were sort of planted, and obviously the largest, as I mentioned, was when my mom passed away. But when I was in film school, there was this opportunity. I had written in my early 20s some films that were so pathetically self-autobiographical, navel-gazing, this idea of when you're actually writing that kind of direct autobiography, it's actually not autobiography, it's your own PR agent to some extent. And in film school, I had dabbled a lot more in a bit more serious kind of character studies, always with maybe a darkly comic slant and that in that land of ambiguity. But I was at NYU in the graduate film program, and this story isn't as romantic, but I think it's really interesting in terms of the creative process. The Alfred P. Sloan Foundation, which funds tons of scientific research, also has a very specific wing that funds the advancement of the public understanding of science through the arts. And they incubate projects that have scientific bents. And I never felt that I had a scientific story inside of me. I'm innately curious, but I have a humanities background. And I sort of stumbled upon and humored this information session. A lot of the films that Sloan makes and supports are historic biopics about famous scientists struggling to come up with profound discoveries. And I wondered if I'm going to engage this process. There's a $100,000 carrot, a $100,000 grant. Nobody wants to make a movie about something that they're not passionate about. It takes a long time. It takes a lot of blood, sweat, and tears. There are people who had won this award prior to me who had forfeited the money because they realized it wasn't something that they wanted to do. And I said, I will only engage this if there's something organic. And is there ever a question in my own life that bordered on the scientific that might have also been the stuff of emotion or the stuff of character? And to treat the science honestly, like if in the scientific minutia there might be emotional catharsis. And I thought about, very instantly in that meeting, it was an epiphany. I thought about my mom's death, and I thought about these thoughts that I had about her body and the way in which I had grafted those thoughts over the timeline of Jewish mourning. Where does my mom's body look like at 7 days, at 30 days? And I never went crazy with it because I think that we, as a society and our cultures therein, we have a very unhealthy relationship with death. We want to, keep it in the dark. We don't want to think about it. We want to poeticize it. Even From Dust to Dust is a very poetic way of masking the very gruesome mechanisms through which that happens. But I realized if one were to engage that thought and to go crazy with that thought, that it was essentially a scientific question, and that then you would be putting science in conversation with religion, and both of those in conversation with emotion, and that it might be a very interesting conversation, not to arrive at any definitive answers, but to have that conversation in art. And so the idea was conceived, and I knew that it required some degree of orthodoxy. If a Reform Jew, if a conservative Jew, even if a modern Orthodox Jew is treading into science, there aren't any stakes there. I briefly wondered whether or not it might be an evangelical Christian, but realized I knew nothing about that world and that I should keep it kind of, in home territory. I also was very humbled, that I didn't know anything really about the Hasidic world either. I, mistakenly thought it's what I know, but just times 100 or times 10. But going down, but here you take a Hasidic man who asking these questions and pursuing this is taboo, not only because it's an excessive display of grief, but also because it's treading into the secular world and scientific questions. And if he has this need to ask these questions, it is an existential threat, not only to his worldview and everything that is built on, but potentially to his belonging in his community. And that when you upped the ante to the Hasidic world, then you had drama and stakes. And as I researched the Hasidic world, and then also I was very humbled by researching the science and this world of forensic anthropology where body farms actually exist and pigs are actually used and there are an infinite number of factors that might affect how any individual body is going to decay. And so researching down these two rabbit holes, my hypothesis was that you'd want to force the story to some place where the mysticism of Kabbalah and this understanding of the soul and the science intersected. And I didn't know where that was going to be, but it was only going down those rabbit holes that I and being beholden to both the accuracy and a respect for both the religion and the accuracy and the respect for both the science. Sometimes you want to wedge the story in this way that forces the drama to what you see as the ideal end. But only by bouncing between those two did we come up with, my writing partner Jason Begg and I, these creative solutions that were more interesting than the places we might have wanted to force the story. And I do think that in very nuanced ways, and also just generally, that if one is to engage how a body decomposes and look at that honestly, and I'm very squeamish, and in many ways this film was a gauntlet to myself to try to look at that taboo and stare at it honestly, that there is a spiritual beauty on the other end of it that also mirrors some of our understanding of the Kabbalistic understanding of the soul. But also the sense that matter is, at the very least, that matter is finite, and we return and we become other things.
We have time for one last question.
This isn't as much of a question as it is a comment. It's a question, but it's a comment.
Can you put it in the form of a question?
Did you realize how pluralistic this movie is and how you speak to both sides? And I think both sides and everyone in between, we are a spectrum. Judaism is a spectrum. And I think you spoke to everybody by asking these questions. And I think that's also what Judaism is about, asking questions. And by delving so deeply into these very personal questions, I thank you.
Thank you so much.
But did you realize?
I'm pluralistic by nature, and humanistic by nature, and very very much so. But I think that it's engaging all of that pluralism with humility, and I think that the movie, I had always said needed to have heart, humility, and humor. And that at the end of the day, I think, you go down the route of religion and you go down the route of science, and at the end, no matter how learned you are or how much you know, there is a mystery and there's unknown, and that we need to be humble before that unknown. And whether it is, again, the outer reaches of science or the upper reaches of religion or the inner reaches of a human heart, that we need to respect that, and in breaking down those boundaries, if we're able to, that we're able to have those conversations with humility. And if there's anything that I think that the movie might be didactic about, it's not about answering the questions. It always hoped to, in that Talmudic way, to ask more questions than it intended to answer. But I think it is didactic about the spirituality inherent in the pluralistic quest.
Let me close by asking everyone here on this panel, and I know some of you have had tequila, so I don't know how heavy you want to get, but has this film process changed the way you speak about death, and how this is a topic, once again, that is hard for us to explore in our society, and I'll once again highlight our What Matters program here that tries to develop these conversations in a caring way. What kind of impact has this had on the way you talk about death? I'll ask all those who
Start at that end. I feel like I'm talking too much. I want to hear these guys.
Just like you said, you see, in the 21st century, our daily life got so denaturalized. But at the end, nature has the last word, right? We all go the same way. And what I learned from this movie is that one way to beat mortality, though it's not obviously a physical, somatic way of beating it, is to take on those loved character traces that we so much valued in the person we just lost. And in that way, they can live in us and in our children forever.
Yeah, that one.
Yeah.
I like that one.
good thing we started with him.
I'm with Géza. Good saying. That was good. Good job. What am I saying? I don't know. Yeah. Oh, yeah. I didn't learn anything about death. I'm frightened of it. I'm still frightened of it.
Comedy and death go together very well.
They do go together. I knew that. No, it was very interesting to make the film and to think about these things. I think neither science nor faith seems to answer it adequately for a lot of people. Maybe it does for some people, but a lot of people have a great deal of a hard time making sense of it. So I related to Shmuel's predicament, and I don't think Albert has an answer for him. I don't really think there is one. At least not in this film. Géza has the answer, but I don't. I'm only teasing. I don't know. Kenny, what is death and why does it happen? It's the end of everything. Okay, that's Kenny Lonergan. The end of everything.
Alessandro and Emily, want to help him out here?
It's what? It's a beginning of something. It's a beginning. Okay, good. That's good. Anybody else have a feeling? Don't think about it too much. I think that's good. Yeah. Alessandro, death, go.
I'm considering unearthing my dad's corpse this weekend. No, look, I don't know about death. I feel very privileged to have worked on both this and Disobedience, and just insofar as that one of the things I like most about being an actor is being allowed into other cultures that I wouldn't otherwise have access to, and I really had a close encounter over these two movies, and I'm grateful for that.
I think that now I'm a bit more sober than I was at the beginning. I remember another thing that I really struck me as I was reading the script for the first time, which was this film is sort of allowing, or not allowing, but sort of making me feel better about the weird thoughts I have often about things like death or birth or love or anything. Like your brain goes to these very odd places. And especially in moments where you think you're supposed to be feeling certain things, like when someone you really love dies. I do remember thinking when my dad died about what was happening to his body and where it was exactly. And I knew it was in a sort of drawer somewhere for a while. But and then sort of thinking, I'm not allowed to think of that. That's weird. And anyway, I have these weird thoughts often. I think we all do. Seemingly inappropriate thoughts. And it's wonderful when something, a book or a play or a film or something, makes you feel less weird and like it's okay to be weird. And in fact, maybe just go with being weird a little bit, and maybe you'll find some comfort. Or if you can sort of share your weird thoughts with someone else, you'll find a fellow traveler. And I don't know, that's what struck me when I read it.
And I think that's the beauty here. We have an audience who's seen this film together as a community, and hopefully we'll continue this conversation together in some way. Shawn, any last thoughts?
I don't know, it made me think a lot about, in some ways my wishes for myself, and I'm not sure where I land. And I do have a very, objective and subjective sense that there is something beautiful about a Jewish cemetery and a grave marker, even though I don't feel my mom's presence when I visit hers, and I haven't visited that much because I feel my mom in my life. But I understand its purpose. But the thought of becoming a tree sounds really nice to me in some ways. I think that maybe I have to put my money where my mouth is after making this movie, and I do find that incredibly beautiful and perhaps comforting in some ways.
Thank you. I want to thank you all. I want to thank you for being a part of this. Somehow by mistake for the reception, we ordered pigs in blankets, which was completely unintentional, but I think is the perfect way to celebrate this film. We look forward to seeing you at other screenings, and please join us upstairs in the lobby in the gallery for the reception. Thank you very much.